can Sunil? Hello.
I can hear you, sir. So
okay.
The voice is very much audible. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So can the participants hear me, Sunil? Then I can start.
Mr. Nadwani, this is B.S. Rao.
Yes.
Mr. Nadwani, this is B.S. Rao. We are able to look at your screen, but your presentation has not been put on yet.
Okay, so I will load it. The participants will have to bear with me because. So good afternoon to all the friends who are here from the industry in various parts of the country. I am new to this mode of communication and this mode of presentation. So you'll have to bear with me in case there is some glitch in the initial stages. I have done this class with NIIT and IFT sometime back at the NIIT studios, but I haven't done this on the webinar mode. So this is my first venture into this, and I'm not used to this mode because I'm the traditional teacher who likes to see his students in front of him, and as a result, I find it slightly difficult to communicate on this mode. But since this is the mode for the future, I shall adapt to it and I shall go ahead. Now I understand that the participants in this program, I find that there are about 17 out of 101 participants who are attending this, and these are participants who are from various parts of the country and who are part of the industry. And so I'm going to talk to you not so much as incentives and as was made out in the opening bars, but more of the foreign trade policy of India as an instrument for duty neutralization and the benefits that are granted for an exporter when he exports. So this is how I'm going to present my my case to you. And as you know, the foreign trade policy of the country is announced by the Director General of Foreign Trade under the Ministry of Commerce, Government of India, fortunately so. And this is announced every 5 years. So the current block that's going on is 2009-14. And so far, what we have done in the last 23 years since we ventured onto liberalization is that we moved on to a regime from a one-year policy which was announced every year on the 1st of April to the 31st of March. We moved on to a 3-year policy, and then eventually we moved on to a 5-year policy. Pre-91 was 1 year and 3 years. Post-91 became a 5-year policy. And as long as there is stability at the center, the policy remains stable. So that's the first message that I would like to communicate to you. And at this point of time, we are all, the Commerce Ministry is in the process of bringing about the new policy, which will be announced for 5 years from 2014 to 2019, and it should be announced soon enough. July, August sometime, it shall be announced probably in August sometime in 2014, and hopefully it will be announced for 5 years. The policy of the Government of India, like any other policy, has a certain set of objectives and goals which it has to meet. And then you go backwards and formulate a strategy to achieve these goals. A policy essentially is a set of rules, regulations, framework, or a structure which tend to move in such a direction that eventually you will achieve the objectives and goals that have been laid out in the foreign trade policy. So there is got to be a set of goals, and there is got to be a set of do's and don'ts. And in any policy, you will generally find that there will be a little bit of negativity. And I'm not saying as far as policy of Government of India is concerned or the foreign trade policy is concerned. Any policy by its very nature means a set of don'ts more than a set of do's. And the basic idea is to then achieve the goals that have been laid out. Here is where I would like to distinguish between a policy and a strategy. A strategy is extremely different and radically different from a policy, and very often we tend to mix up the goals, the two. A policy is something which is stated by the Government of India. It is a platform which is laid down, and within the parameters of the policies, it is the private sector which then brings about the strategies to achieve those goals. You could also say that the Government of India brings about strategies which help in achieving those goals. And when I say the Government of India brings out strategies, it brings out facilitation measures, it brings about promotional measures which help you in achieving those goals. So let's look at some of the policy objectives that the government of India has. But before we get onto the goals, it will be imperative for you to try and understand what are the export data that we have for the country. In the year 2013-14, we did about $312 billion of exports, and we did something like $460 billion of imports. So our trade deficit was close to the tune of about $150 billion. Whereas in the previous year, in 12-13, we did $300 billion of exports and about $498 billion of imports. So the trade deficit was almost close to $200 billion. So one of the good things that has happened is that the trade deficit has been arrested, and that was largely controlled by the consumption of gold. So the CAD actually came down. But the other good thing that happened was that over 2011-12, the exports had gone down. In 11-12, our exports were $306 billion, and then in 12-13, it went down to $300 billion. Fortunately, there was a recovery. So that has been a good signal. So two things that happened good was we went back on the growth target, and the second thing that happened was that we also contained our trade deficit. The other thing that happened that was good was that that has happened that was good, and that is there in today's paper, is that our exports have gone up. And when I say exports have grown up, there has been a rise of 10.22% in June 2014 to the tune of $26.48 billion. And while imports have also grown up by 8.33% to $38 billion. In the first 2 months of the year, we did about $52 billion, and this month we did $26 billion. So we did about $38 billion. And our exports are doing fine. Our trade deficit is also is within control. So it is essential for us to know what are the export-import figures before we get on to set off to find out what the objectives, what are the schemes that are there. Now, the other thing that is to be noted is that while on the one hand we would like exports to grow and grow and grow, on the other hand we would not like to discourage imports completely, because without imports you will not get into exports. You will not be able to get that value addition or get the right material of raw materials or the capital goods to venture out into exports. So that's something which I have to say upfront straight away. The second, so let's stick on to the presentation, and then maybe the interesting part would be the question and answer session. Now, we had said that we would like to attain 5% of global merchandise by 2020. Now that's a big question mark as I'm concerned. Now when I am having this this webinar, let me tell you right up front that the views that I'm presenting are not the views of the government of India, and they are not the views of the Commerce Ministry. They are the views of Sanjeev Nandwani. So if there are any differences or any controversial things that I say, they are definitely not the views of government of India. And so we wanted to achieve a target of 5% of global merchandise trade by about 2020. Now, what is global merchandise trade? Global merchandise trade is to the tune of about $18 to $20 trillion, out of which our share is $300 billion. Now, that's for you to figure out how much is our share vis-a-vis the total export basket. And when I say 5% of global trade, it means a huge quantum jump. And for that huge quantum jump, there has to be a huge amount of work that has been to be put together by both the government as well as the private sector. And when I say the government has to lay down the right policies, the government has to lay down sustainable policies, the government has to ensure that those policies are implementable and implemented, the government facilitates the policies, the government promotes those policies, but it's the private sector which will have to produce and export. So there's these twin pillars of production by private sector and hand-holding shoulder to shoulder by the government sector, which does the infrastructure building, and it's only then that we can take the nation ahead. Now, what do you want to do out of this policy? What are the objectives? Clearly, exports is one of the primary objectives, but you must remember that it cannot be exports alone. It has to be exports, it has to be employment generation, it has to be poverty alleviation. These are the primary things that any government would like to do, because once you get into exports and you make money out of your external sector, you would then like to put that money to ensure that it creates employment, it creates investment, and it removes poverty at some point of time. Now, I shall now move on to the next slide. Before I get on to the next slide, I also would like to cross-check with Mr. Rao or with Sonal to find out whether I am not speaking to a wall and the participants are able to hear me. Is Mr. Rao there? Hello? Okay, I'll get that cross-checked on the phone, but I assume that people are able to hear me and I'm not speaking to the wall. And so I will, can you just find out from Sonal whether everything is fine and what's going on, because I don't have a feedback. You know, I always used to think that a classroom is like a theater. Here's the number. So I would always thought that classroom is like a theater, and where you get an instant feedback, and you know that the class is like your class, the class is not like your class. But here is a situation where I do not know where the class is, where the people are, and they're scattered all over. Whether they're sleeping or they're able to understand, it's slightly difficult mode for me. But nonetheless, I shall make an attempt to try and speak and make it into a monologue for the first few minutes. So we also need to, when we say that we need to get employment exports, from our end, the strategy that we place is that we need to make sure that the procedures, the rules, the regulations that we talk about, they are simple to understand. They're simple to read. There are not too many notwithstanding, here under, there under, provisos, etc., 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 and that an arm army can actually hear and read whatever is going on, and then be able to implement it. His job is not to get around stuck on government bureaucracy and procedures and the rules and regulation and the legalese that we use all the time. Two is, are we making life easy for you, or are we putting too many controls? So checks and balances are good in the system, but to put too many controls is not the desired goal of any government. The other thing that we have learned in the last 25 years, as opposed to the earlier regime, is that we put a lot of trust in trade, and we put a lot of self-declarations, self-removals. Trust in trade is the key to growth, because without trust, we will not be able to work. Now, the governments put a lot of effort on putting checks, and we make the laws very complicated to catch that crook. And if there's a crook, he's going to beat the system anyway. So why not trust the 99% of the people, 99.9999% of the people who are good? So we try to make our rules easy to understand, easy to read, and easy to implement. So that's another strategy that we are putting into place. We are making all kinds of e-governance so that the visits to government offices are reduced, and you spend more time at your doorsteps, at your markets, or at your production centers, at your offices, rather than spending and wasting time in government offices, because you would essentially have to visit so many government offices to get your work done. Now, what would be the objective of when you export? नहीं आ रही. Hello. Well, can you
Sir,
just
we
hold the line
request
because
you to, yeah, please, we'll just double check the voice thing. I request you to give us just 1 minute because participants are requesting that the voice is cracking. So we'll just double check it and move further, sir.
okay. My microphone says this is fine. So what's the second microphone? The speaker. Hello.
Yes, sir, we can hear you now. Can you just, can you hear
Yeah,
me?
can you hear me now? I can hear you very well.
Yeah,
But can
it's
you?
better now.
You're in the class. It's better now.
It's
Hello.
a little better, sir. We request you to move further.
Further away from the screen.
No, no, as in we can
You are further
continue
as
with
in
the
the
session.
class. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but okay, if the participants can't hear me, then there's no point. Yeah. So so as I was saying, the strategy for the government is to simplify the procedures, to unlock the shackles, and to make life easy for the exporters, and make sure that the e-governance benefits that the government is insisting upon or is dwelling upon is taken advantage of, rather than spending time with us in our government offices. The foreign trade policy says that when an exporter exports, he should get the neutralization of his duties. It says that do not give incentives, because the incentives come from the exchequer, but whatever duties are incurred at the time of exporting, be they on the raw material, be they on the capital goods, be they on any form of duties that the government is imposing, the export products and the exporters should not be levied such duties. And so the foreign trade policy actually in a way becomes an instrument of duty neutralization. And in addition to the fact that it is also a strategy, it is also a set of rules and regulations to achieve the objectives that I was mentioning earlier. We would also like India to be a global hub for manufacturing, trading. So we not only look at India as east, look east, but look at the whole world and try to fit in wherever we can. And we've already in the last few years moved away from the traditional markets of Europe and US and made huge headway in new markets, which we call focus markets in Africa, in the Middle East, and in ASEAN, in many other places. So that's where we are moving, and then you identify certain areas where we would like to focus on, and that's exactly where we bring in the reward schemes that we are doing in the policy of the Government of India. And at the same time, we would like the exporters not to export with obsolete machines. We would like them to manufacture goods out of proper capital goods, new capital goods, and upgrade the infrastructure that they have, upgrade the investments that they have. We are fine with government importing capital goods, because unless you import capital goods, and since we do not manufacture all the capital goods that are required in the country, we encourage people to import capital goods, and we give duty concessions on those capital goods if people get into exports. We also want a system where we do not have an inverted duty structure. We don't want a duty structure where there's a high duty on the raw material, but there's a low duty on the end product. For instance, on the batteries, an example that could be given of batteries. So we want the lead to be on the low duty rather than the battery to be on the low duty. And so the idea is to manufacture those goods and then export them. The other thing is that the Board of Trade, which is kind of it's a body or a body of traders or of the industrialists, and we would like to revitalize the Board of Trade. We would like to revitalize the industry interests and hear them out, listen to them, and find out what's going on. And this Board of Trade, which is attended by the Honorable Minister, is also a situation where we have the representatives of all the top exporters, of top export promotion councils, where they come in and voice their concerns of the industry for infrastructure development, for changes in policy, changes in the duty structure, etc., which is heard by the Ministry of Commerce, and then the Ministry of Commerce then acts as an advocacy organization and represents the Commerce Ministry, to the Finance Ministry for duty structures as and when required, and take them on board before announcing the foreign trade policy. Now, for the first time, it so happened that the Honorable Minister for Commerce is the same as the Honorable Minister for Finance. So we are going to have less problems where there's an interaction. We always had this lacuna of interaction between the commerce and the finance, and where we would like the finance and commerce to synchronize and address the needs of the exporters. To give you an example, just this morning there was an award ceremony in Calcutta of the Federation of Indian Exporters, the FIO, which is the largest umbrella organization of all the councils, where all the top exporters of the Eastern region were awarded, and the awards were given by the Honorable Minister of Commerce and Industry and Finance of Government of West Bengal, Dr. Amit Mitra, and who was earlier from FICCI. And we had all of us from the central government. We had officers from the state government. We also had officers from the customs and central excise. Now, this is a perfect partnership where the central governments between the commerce and revenue shared together, and the state governments, and we all put in, while it was an award ceremony, it was also a lot of discussion on how to boost exports and how to get new industries to come and set up across in the Eastern region, because there's the Eastern region effect, event. We also, so this was a perfect partnership of the states with the center, and within the center between the revenue and the commerce department. So that's something which the foreign trade policy will not work unless you have complete coherence between what is said by the two departments and put into action. Now, let me try and explain to you the policy of the. Let me just 1 second. I'll just. Let me also confess to you that I'm basically not a PPT guy. I'm more of a chalk and talk guy. So I'm more comfortable with the classroom and the boardroom, classroom method of teaching with the chalk. So I hope my PPT, which was made hurriedly, is going to work. Now, just 1 minute, I'll get you. Let me explain the export policy of the country. Without the PPT, because there are 2 or 3 slides which should have been there but are not there. The foreign trade policy of the country consists of 2 parts, the export policy and the import policy. Now, the export policy actually tells you what items cannot be exported and what items can be exported, and the import policy corollary tells you what items can be imported and what items cannot be imported. So let me get that factor very, very clear and into the minds of the participants. Let's get on to the export policy. As a nation, our imports are much more than our exports. We have a trade deficit. We've historically had a trade deficit. Any country would like to export as much as possible. We would not like to restrict our exports. We would like to export almost anything and everything. But quite clearly, the participants would understand that we would not like to export items which are environmentally hazardous. We would not like to export items where there is a huge domestic shortage. We would not like to export items where there are moral hazards. So I like to explain to you the items which, against each example that I'm giving, so which are environmentally problematic. So we would not like to export our flora and fauna, our trees. We would like to preserve our trees because that's the responsibility of every nation, that's the responsibility of every government. And all across the world, people do not allow export of the trees and logs in the primary form. However, you would find that we do allow import of these items, or there are some countries which allow export of these items, but they are under structured forest policy of the respective nations. Having said that, I must tell you that we do allow export of items of furniture, etc., which are the value-added forms. And so we have a huge afforestation and deforestation policy of the Ministry of Environment, the Government of India. Similarly, the items which are hugely, there's a domestic shortage. For example, I can give you a state example of pulses, dal. We eat a lot of dal, but there's a shortage. So since there is a shortage, we do not allow exports of those items. We do not allow export of ivory, of sandalwood, so stuff like that, of birds, the flora and fauna that we need to protect. We do not allow export of drugs as in the negative form of drugs. We would not allow such items to be exported because either they are environmentally hazardous or there is a shortfall or on moral grounds. Other than these, primarily we allow everything to be exported. So the total number of items which are not allowed by the country to be exported by an exporter is very, very limited as opposed to the total amount of items which are allowed to be exported. So we have a negative list which says prohibited, restricted and canalized, but most of the people and most of the participants today are not in the business of exporting those set of items that I'm talking about. So as far as an exporter is concerned, he does not require an export license to export. So these items are free for exports. He does not require an export license. All he requires is an importer-exporter code number. And an importer-exporter code number cannot be equated with an export license. So I do not want to dwell more on the export policy at this point of time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the import policy. Now, are we going to restrict imports or are we going to encourage imports? We have the same set of principles that are there for exports as in imports. We either prohibit imports or we restrict imports or we canalize imports, and the rest are free. So the items which are totally prohibited for imports are ivory, animal rennet, beef tallow for some strange reason. So these are three items which are restricted for import, prohibited for imports. There is a small set of list of items which are not allowed for import, basically hazardous chemicals, etc., etc., etc. And there are some items which we believe that nations should be going through the state trading enterprises or through certain big agencies like the IOC, etc., etc. Till the time our private sector ripens up and becomes mature to start doing those imports or exports directly, we tell them to go through the canalized route or the state trading route. But by and large, all the items that an industry would need are free for imports. So the capital goods, the raw materials, consumables, spares, accessories, tools, molds, fixtures, parts, computers, everything that facilitates imports would be allowed free. So I want to finish the foreign trade policy per se with only this, that when I say they are free for imports, which means that you do not require an import license. Just like when they're free for exports, you do not require an export license. The only thing that you require is an importer-exporter code number. So you do not have to come back to the DGFT, which was earlier known as the Chief Controller Import-Export, to get an import license to import. Till 1991, and I was here at that point of time, the regime that we followed was so stringent that if a person had to import a capital good, which is a machine, it would take 8 to 10 months, and he would follow a rigorous procedure. So all that is completely gone. And now life for an exporter-importer is far easier than it was earlier. Having imported, in the normal case, in the normal circumstances, in the normal conditions of temperature and pressure, a person would have to pay revenue or duties on imports. However, if the person wants to export goods manufactured out of those capital goods or the raw materials, he can actually get the duty benefits, which I shall be talking about now. So this restriction, the slide that is there in front of you, simply says that any item which is restricted either for imports or exports requires a license. The rest you do not require a license. I'll take a 30-second break at this point of time. I just need to adjust my computer. Okay, I'm back now. The principles on which we restrict, I've already mentioned certain things to you. These are some of the principles which are written down in our policy. So you might just like to read this. I would not, they're all very simple to understand. I'll just take one of them, prevention of the use of prison labor, because prison labor is, as it is, captive labor. So you could get anything out of them. So out of human rights, we do not allow prison labor, just like we do not allow goods made out of child labor. Of course, that gets into a total different debate on whether carpets made in Varanasi from child labor should be allowed to be exported or not to be exported. But that's a different set of debate, which is possibly not the topic for today. This is exactly what I was talking about: prohibited items, restricted items, canalized items, and free. The reason why we use the word canalized is because it goes through a certain canal or a certain channel. You have to export it through a canalizing agency like Indian Oil Corporation, like the State Trading Corporation, the MMTC, etc., etc., etc. But I must also tell you that at some point of time, a large number of items were canalized, but then when we went into the process of liberalization, we removed them from the canalized list to the free list, which was earlier called the Open General License, or the OGL. So the items which were there in the first free list were huge, which have subsequently come down to the free list. Now, this is the kind of stuff that we do, either in Commerce Ministry, in terms of the export facilitation measures, etc. So I'm going to dwell on the lower portions on the right, which talks about the benefits that the exporter gets, and most of these benefits of the focus product market, etc., are going to be dwelt by me in a little detail. So these are market initiatives that we do. But in addition to the foreign trade policy, starting from the top left-hand corner, we call it a side scheme, which is the assistance to states for infrastructure development for exports. And this is where the Government of India, the Commerce Ministry, sets out certain funds for assisting the trade industry to set up infrastructure. This is left, the funds are left at the control of a committee which is called the State Level Export Promotion Committee, headed by the Chief Secretary but mainly monitored by the Commerce Ministry, Government of India, where we give funds for creating infrastructure which eventually lead to exports. So I shall repeat the name: Assistance to States for Infrastructure Development for Exports. So you can have reefers, you can have pack houses, you can have warehouses, you can have standardized factories, the works that training centers, skill development centers, anything that eventually leads to more and more exports where the government has to pitch in. And this is the low end of infrastructure development. It is not the high end. The high end of infrastructure development is done by the DIPP called IIUS, Industrial Infrastructure Upgradation Scheme, which is the high end of infrastructure. We then move on to the right-hand top corner where we say towns of export excellence. Some of the things are tamasha in the policy, but this is also one of them. We declare certain states as towns of export excellence. So we make certain towns like Moradabad for brass, hardware, Tirupur for cotton, so the towns which have achieved excellence in a particular area, where we can call it a cluster-based approach or a park-based approach, where these towns have specialized in certain items. On the left-hand bottom corner are two schemes called the Market Development Assistance or the Market Access Initiative. These are two fundamental schemes for promotional efforts of the Commerce Ministry, which are administered to the Export Promotion Councils. The Export Promotion Councils are autonomous bodies under the Ministry of Commerce, which are headed by a businessman, by the exporting community. The Secretariat or the Director General is normally a government servant. And here we give funds to conduct buyer-seller meets, exhibitions, take part in exhibitions abroad, trade fairs, things which are export promotional in nature. So we participate in all these. We take delegations outside. Similarly, in the Market Access Initiative, you bring in journalists from outside to publicize your country. You put in efforts to bring out certain research papers, product research, item research, process research. So all that is covered under the Market Access Initiative program of the Government of India. I would like at this point of time, just a minute. Yeah, I don't have that yet. So let me, before I go down to screen. There are 9 chapters in the foreign trade policy of the country. Chapter 1 is the preamble. The preamble is we the people of India having solemnly, etc., etc. So the mission, vision statement which I've been dwelling on so far. Chapter 2 is the general set of rules and guidelines, which countries we allow exports, why we don't allow export to some countries. We've curtailed, we had some countries where we would not allow exports at all, or we do not allow trade with them, but that list has gone down, truncated heavily, and so we virtually have only 1 or 2 places where we do not have trade. Otherwise, we allowed free trade with almost all the nations. So what are the general conditions in this case? You send goods and they're destroyed or they're spoiled and they need to come back, or you import certain goods which are not of good quality and need to be sent back. So we concentrate on those items in Chapter 2. And the general conditions, how to get an importer-exporter code number, etc., etc., etc. Chapter 3 is the reward schemes, as it were. The reward schemes are on the right-hand side, bottom corner of your screen, which I'm going to talk about in detail one by one. These are the reward schemes. So these are incentives. These are not neutralization, and I will come to this in a moment. Chapter 4 and 5 are duty neutralization or duty refund schemes on the inputs and the capital goods. Chapter 6 is export-oriented units, which is not the subject for discussion today because it's moved on to the STZ division of the Commerce Ministry. Chapter 7 has become a separate act called the Special Economic Zone Act, which is my charge as the Development Commissioner for Special Economic Zones for East and Northeast. That's my prime area. So Chapter 7 and 6 are gone. Chapter 8 is something called deemed exports, and Chapter 9 is the definitions. What are the definitions? What do you mean by license? What do you mean by capital good? What do you mean by spare? What do you mean by third-party export? So Chapter 9 is definition. So there are primarily 9 chapters in the foreign trade policy of the country. And between the foreign trade policy of the country, which is the stated policy, and the handbook of procedures, which tells you which are the rules, what are the forms, where do you get the forms, where are the offices, how many sets of applications you've got to fill up, etc., etc. We furnished all that. We state all that in the handbook of procedures. So between the two of them, we virtually finish off the foreign trade policy. So let's get on to Chapter 3 per se, and let's look on to the first item called the focus product scheme. Now, we, let's say, have been exporting an item called shirts or trousers or pens or sofas or chairs, exporting these items historically, or jute or tea or something. But then at some point of time, we develop a niche product and we say that this item was never exported by this country. I'm developing this item, I'm putting in some research efforts, I'm putting in some money to get the research, I'm putting in some money to get the innovation on the product done, get the product designed. So let's say an item like a carbide cutting tool, a diamond cutting tool, a specialized diamond cutting tool, which was hitherto not exported. So these are products which are encouraged, and because they are encouraged, we give them a benefit of 2% on their export value as a focus product scheme, which has now become 4%. So the duty credit of 4% on your export, suppose you exported 100 bucks as FOB value, which is a free on board value, you would get 4 rupees as focus product scheme. How you export them, I will tell you. How you get these benefits, I'll tell you in a moment. These are freely transferable scripts, and these are exported. A script is a license. So we keep changing these words. License becomes an authorization, becomes a script. As per our convenience, we have this wonderful language called English, where we have lots of synonyms, and we keep changing names. You know, at some point of time, we used to call these new products. Then we call them thrust products, we call them sunshine products, we call them focus products. We'll come out with some new name sooner rather than later. We keep changing names. So my city, Calcutta, becomes Kolkata. And similarly, when we have nothing better to do, we keep changing names. So we give a focus product scheme. Similarly, we have a focus market scheme. So we have traditional markets, let's say Europe or US. But suppose you were to export to Colombia or Chile, or Ivory Coast or Costa Rica, countries which you have heard of only once in 4 years when there's a World Cup football. You don't know about these countries. These are countries where it's freight prohibitive for you to export. You export and the cost of freight is very, very high. Or you export to a country which is difficult in terms of trying to in terms of security reasons. Some countries which are more I don't want to name those countries, but some, let's say, countries in Africa where the security concerns are there. So you need, or they are landlocked countries, you're exporting to them. So they're difficult countries to penetrate, to get markets from, to get your products sold there. So we give them a benefit of a focus market, which we give them a benefit of 3% of their FOB value of exports. Just hold on for a moment. So sorry. So there's a focus market scheme that we do export to these difficult markets, and then we came up with a scheme called the Market Link Focus Product Scheme, which is a matrix of certain products to certain markets, and we then allow a certain percentage of your exports. These are markets which have these are markets and products which have high export intensity and high employment potential. That's the basic premises on which we give the market link focused product scheme. Now we also have a benefit called Vishesh Krishi Gram Udyog Yojana. Now this Vishesh Krishi Gram Udyog Yojana is an improvement of the earlier scheme called the Vishesh Krishi Upaj Yojana. And we then changed the name to Vishesh Krishi Gram Udyog Yojana, which is a benefit that is given on agricultural products, which is given on agricultural products as a certain proportion of the exports. And again, these are all freely transferable scripts. And the other benefit that we give is something called a status certificate. The status certificate that we give is we recognize people for their achievements. We say that you've done well, so you need to be promoted. So we used to call them 1-star, 2-star, 3-star exporters, but we now call them export house, trading house, star trading house, premium trading house, so on and so forth. Basically, this is to recognize their achievement. So these are the categories of people that we reward. We give the status certificates on these kind of categories that are there. The privileges are not too many. It's basically more of an appreciation of what you have done. And so we say that we give you exemption from bank guarantees and issuance of licenses, etc., etc., etc. But more, the privileges are more in the mind, in the sense that we recognize your efforts to have done these exports. Now, we also believe that exports of services need to be recognized. And so we have the tradable services, the 161 tradable services, which are defined under the General Agreement of Trade and Services under WTO AGs. And we give these benefits to all the services, and the 161 services actually cover all these services, and we grant them benefits again as a proportion of their exports. And we say that people in the service sector, basically in the hospitality sector, the sector which is into, let's say, transportation of goods, in the shipping sector, etc., etc. We recognize their efforts, and then we allow them to get the benefit of the SFI scheme. So, for instance, there's an architect who's done some services and he's provided services outside the country, and he needs certain equipment to do his service better. Or there's a hotel which has a lot of foreign tourists and who pay in foreign exchange. So the country has earned foreign exchange, and you want to upgrade your services. You want to bring in better equipment in the pantry, in the galleys, etc., or in whichever form you want. You will be allowed to import those items duty-free as a percentage of your exports. So we call them Serve from India scheme or an SFIS scheme. These are the promotional measures of market development assistance, market access initiative, and brand promotion that I've already mentioned in brief a little while ago. Okay, these funds are laid down at the hand of the export promotion councils, and small-time exporters who have not had a turnover of about more than 15 crores, we give them airfares to go outside the country and participate in these trade fairs. We also take care of their the trade fair booking charges, the stall booking charges, etc., etc., etc. We do all that. Now, same thing I've already mentioned about the market development assistance. Now, let's look at the duty refunds. What are the types of duties that are available on the exporters? What are the types of duties not available, are charged on the exports when somebody exports? The duties that are charged are primarily the 5 duties that are mentioned on the left-hand side of your scheme, which are the central taxes, like the excise, customs, central sales tax, service tax, etc. And then the electricity duty, sales, octroi, etc. The income tax is chargeable. Till 2001, we had no income tax on exports, but subsequently we started charging them, and now it is 100% duty on exports. But primarily you need to be refunded duties on customs and central excise, both on your inputs as well as excise duty on your output. So the output excise duty is ab initio exempted, but the the custom duty and excise duty on your inputs is exempted by the method of advance authorization on your inputs, raw materials. And for that we have something called a standard input-output norm, which is fixed by the Commerce Ministry, the DGFT, in consultation with technical authorities. So we know exactly how much of inputs to be granted to you. The post-export schemes, in case you don't want an advanced license as a pre-import ab initio exemption of duty, is the drawback. The DPB is a scheme which has gone away. We've kept it on the slide only because we are just doing the residual activity on that. Drawback is a duty on the is a refund of the duties on the inputs to the end product, just like advanced license is an ab initio exemption. Similarly, the EPCG is the export promotion of capital goods, which is a duty which is refundable, which is ab initio exempted on import of capital goods, provided you give them 6 times export obligation in a period of 6 years. So I shall repeat. If you import a capital good and you are an exporter or a potential exporter, you will be ab initio exempted the duty on the capital goods, provided you commit to us that you will export goods manufactured out of this capital goods and export them in a period of 6 years. So if you import a capital good today, you install it, do the trial runs, do the initial runs, sell some to the domestic market initially, and then subsequently export over a period of blocks. You can, in a complete period of 6 years, you can finish off your export obligation 100% and absolve yourself of the onus of the export obligation imposed on you. Now let me give you a small example. Suppose I'm a manufacturer of pens, and to make a pen I import, let us say, plastic, ink, steel tips, brass tips, whatever is required to manufacture a pen as an advanced license, and I have a duty exemption on that. And suppose I import goods worth, let's say, 10 crores, and I have an export obligation of, let's say, 20 crores, theoretically. But at the same time, I also have an advanced capital goods, an EPCG license to manufacture the pens. So I've taken the raw materials as advanced license, and I have taken a capital good under the EPCG scheme. And in the capital good, theoretically, let us say I have an export obligation of 20 crores. So I have an advanced license obligation of 20 crores. I have a capital good obligation of 20 crores. So I have a combined obligation of 40 crores. But in reality, if you export only 20 crores, both your obligations run concurrently and get over. So you do not need to export 40 crores. You can export only 20 crores and your export obligation gets fulfilled. DPB is gone, so I'm not going to talk to you about this. Since I made a comparison of the deemed exports, let me talk about deemed exports, which is chapter 8. So that's chapter 4 and 5 in a nutshell. And chapter 8, I'm going to tell you right now. So normally, an export is said to be complete when you send the goods physically outside the country, and in return foreign exchange is earned by the country. So I shall repeat, when the goods cross your territorial waters and they are exported to another country, and in return, in lieu of that, foreign exchange is earned by the country, the transaction is over, it's called an export. But let's look at a situation where you do not export, but foreign exchange is earned. So I shall repeat, where the goods do not cross the territorial waters of the country, but foreign exchange is earned. So there could be several examples. For instance, one of the live examples would be, let us say, a big agency like ATPC gets a World Bank project, earns a $5 billion credit from World Bank or wherever, and several people bid for it, international competitive bidding. The Indian bidder gets the contract. So he saved the foreign exchange from flowing out of the country. So any supplies made by the Indian bidder to NTPC would qualify for deemed exports because that Indian bidder has saved precious foreign exchange for the country. So that's one live example. 2, in the case of the pen exporter, instead of importing, let us say, plastic granules, he takes it from a local supplier, let's say Reliance. So that's import substitution. He's again saving foreign exchange. So that supply to the pen supplier or the pen manufacturer, that supplier of plastic granules by a local supplier to the pen manufacturer qualifies to be a deemed export. So a deemed export is something where the goods do not travel out of the country, but the foreign exchange is earned or saved, and you could call it an import substitution. One of the live examples could also be in the services sector. So a foreigner comes to India, stays in a 5-star hotel, an example that I was giving earlier. He stays in a 5-star hotel and he pays in foreign exchange because that's how he's supposed to pay. So he's not, the services have not traveled out of the country. The services are imparted within the country, but foreign exchange is earned. So that, to my mind, is a deemed export in the service sector. And the early examples were deemed export, examples of deemed export in the manufacturing sector, simple examples of. So these guys get the same benefits that a physical exporter gets. So he gets an advanced license, he gets an EPCG license, and in his case, since the supplies are made domestically, on his end product, his excise duty is not ab initio exempted because the supplies are not going out of the country. He's charged the supplies, excise duty, and he's refunded the excise duty by the method of TED refund or the terminal excise duty refund. And this is the comparative chart of the 3 situations. You can leave the intermediate supplies for a later time in case you have questions. But you could have a look at the physical exports and deemed exports. The validity period, of course, is not 24 months anymore. It is 18 months. So that's something that you need to cross-check. So please have a look at it, and I'll join you in a minute. Move on from this comparison of physical exports and deemed exports. I'm not getting into DFIA today. Okay, the APCG is 0% duty. Now, I have put 8 times the duty saved in 8 years only to tell you that we have liberalized further, and it is not 8 times in 8 years that was there earlier. It is 6 times in 6 years at the moment. And you could clear off both the obligations with one export. Advanced license and EPCG obligation runs concurrently. Okay, I think this is a slide that I've been talking about earlier. So what is a physical export and what is a deemed export? Okay, now I will not like to dwell on any particular scheme at this point of time. I think I am quite done with all these schemes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, I shall just briefly tell you about chapters 6 and 7 because that will help you in understanding the entire FTP. Chapter 6 is the export-oriented units. Now that was a step towards further liberalization in the country some time back, many years ago, when we set up an export-oriented unit scheme. And those were the days when getting a license from the Director General of Foreign Trade or the previous name Chief Controller Import Export was very, very difficult. It was a problematic thing. There was very little transparency. There was very little accountability. It was a closed system, a negative system, an inward-looking system where people would take ages to get licenses. In addition, you had high tariffs, very high tariffs. So even if you were lucky and got a license, you would have to pay huge amount of tariffs on your goods. So it was actually quite difficult for industry to perform. So we then said that if you have a factory in a particular area and if you bond that area, if you earmark an area and demarcate it and get it warehoused by the Central Excise Department, we call you an export-oriented unit provided you are exporting all your products. And we then said all the raw material that you import will be duty-free, all the capital goods that you import will be duty-free, provided you export your entire production. Then we realized that you cannot export your entire production, you might have to sell some in the domestic market. So gradually we allowed you certain amount of domestic sales called domestic tariff area sales. And we said that DTA sales up to so and so percentage was allowed at concessional rate of duty, and beyond that was allowed at full rate of duty. However, this scheme over a period of time has lost its sheen, and a large amount of units have debonded from this scheme. The primary reason being is your domestic tariff area under the foreign trade policy has liberalized so much in the last 23-24 years that the tariffs have come down, the licensing procedures have become easy, so the advantage of an EOU scheme over a DTA scheme have withered away. So that's chapter 6. Now let's look at chapter 7, which is the special economic zone. I would take at least 8 to 10 hours to explain to you what is a special economic zone. But suffice it to say for today, in a nutshell, that a special economic zone is an enclave or an area with a particular landmass, a minimum area, which is notified by the Ministry of Commerce to the Government of India, either as a multi-product or a sector-specific special economic zone, or a service sector SEZ like an IT or a BT sector SEZ. And so you have different areas, area limitations that are there, which we have reduced and liberalized recently in 2013. The idea is that it's a single window clearance under the aegis of the Development Commissioner, who acts as the Labor Commissioner, who acts as the RCMC, the IC, everything, all the benefits, all the clearances that are required by a unit or an exporter to export or to start functioning, or a factory owner to start functioning, are given by the Development Commissioner. And so it is a genuine single window clearance. And once those permissions are given, you start exporting under a certificate called the letter of permission, which acts as a license for everything. So you don't have to have several licenses, you just have to have one license, and that is good enough. Against that, you can import whatever raw materials that you want, whatever capital goods that you want, as long as there is a nexus with the item that is going to be eventually exported. However, if you want to import furniture and computers and servers and stuff like that, which are required to run the offices within the zone, all that is also allowed duty-free, and we use a term called authorized operations. The authorized operations need not be restricted to the item of export per se. So he then does not have to follow any of the procedures of advanced license, EPCG, etc. he gets all the duties ab initio exempted. Plus, the export obligation on him is once in 5 years in a block of 5 years. And in 5 years, we want you to be NFE positive, which is net foreign exchange positive, which means that you give us a certificate duly certified by a chartered accountant and signed by you, saying that you have achieved this much of exports. We cross-check with our customs related data on the computer, and then we certify it saying that it's all done. So he does not have to maintain those huge bulky shipping bills and bank realization certificates that are supposed to be maintained under the foreign trade regime. In addition, all these other taxes such as central sales tax, the electricity duties, etc., are exempt on his product. So these are ab initio exemptions rather than post, trying to get a refund on the post. There are two benefits primarily. Three benefits. One is a single window, which functions as a single window. The problem that I face when I hear the term single window in government, I'm very wary of this term called single window, because every time I get into a single window, I get into multiple doors. I hit multiple doors. And I'm very scared, but this SEZ actually works as a single window. So that's number one. Number two, all exemptions are ab initio without separate applications for them. And number three is that your export obligation runs only after 5 years. And though annually you tell us your performances by way of an annual performance report, and it's just one certificate, a one-page certificate of your performance that you give every year, and after 5 years we monitor you to see whether you're able to export whatever you had stated. It does not deter you from selling in the domestic market. 100% of your exports don't have to be done. Manufacturing does not have to be export. You can sell in the domestic market. Of course, then if you sell in the domestic market, we don't want the domestic player to be discriminated against. So we ask you to pay duties on those products. And all you need to do is NFE positive, which means if you've imported $100, you have to actually export only $101. So it's a very liberal scheme, a nice scheme, and it has in the last 7-8 years since its existence in 2005-06 has achieved a huge amount of success, and it claims to about 20-25% of the country's entire export basket. Now that is as far as the benefits under the foreign trade policy the government of India is concerned. I am going to end my talk at this point of time, and I'll request Mr. Rao and Sonal to come on, and if there are questions that need to be answered, I'll try and answer them on the system. Thank you very much for being patient.